deployable threat sensor. Appears to lock onto and highlight any targets in range. Could be useful. Armor belonged to a Spartan named Hudson Griffin. Sensor logs suggest he was alive when the armor was removed.
This is environmental storytelling, and it's been done since Halo Combat Evolved. And in the series of Halo, which we're going to be talking about today, it's evolved in many different ways, and in some sad cases, de-evolved. First of all, before we start just going into environmental storytelling, it's probably important to tell you what it is. Environmental storytelling is, well, using the environment to tell a story, but a bit in hidden ways, more receptive to the player rather than the character the player is playing. Environmental storytelling is basically telling the character something without directly telling them. It's like the comparison of showing versus tell. Like, when you're showing something, it can be a lot more powerful than just flat out telling the character or the player through, like, an audio log. Moving into Halo Combat Evolved, Halo Combat Evolved used environmental storytelling in mainly two different ways. One, for player resources, and two, to build tension. When you're in a game fighting aliens, the only weapons you're going to run into normally are going to be the alien weapons. Except Halo Combat Evolved decided to be very clever and make it so the player could use human weapons later by putting in crashed Pelicans and dead Marines. Plus, it also gave them a reason to be there. Of course, they could have just gone through and just placed the AR on the ground, just have it there, but that wouldn't make sense in this situation. Halo Combat Evolved only used, I feel, building tension in one level specifically. 343 Guilty Spark. I think everybody knows this level because it's one of the most masterfully crafted levels in the game. To base summary, this level introduces the Flood, the parasitic infection that just consumes you and then uses your body with just disgusting. They're disgusting and they're terrifying. So how to introduce an enemy this terrifying in a level? The creators did this beautifully. Right off bat, when you load into the level, you see Covenant running away, and then you see a crashed UNSC ship. Both really weird, and the UNSC ship even has an audio log playing from it talking about weird targets in the forest. The more you go through the level, you'll find more things that don't make sense, and one of the most important keys of environmental storytelling I want to point out here specifically is the use of having two factions fighting. Like when you get to the entrance to the place, you see UNSC gunfire, and then you see Covenant running away. And you go towards it, nothing. When you descend down to the facility, you'll find all sorts of key uses of environmental storytelling to build up this tension. Like, for example, the Flood, like little spores hitting the ground, the Jackal corridor that's filled with their bodies and blood. You'll even find the Crazed Marine next to a lot like explosion debris. The Crazed Marine shouts, crazy Marine stuff talking about it getting into your skin and that he acted dead to make sure not to get caught. These are uses of environmental storytelling to help build that player. Then when you find the main room, you find the weapons on the ground, and you find a helmet on the ground of Jenkins. By looking through the helmet, you can finally confirm that it was the Flood. And this whole level does this excellently, and it just portrays this good build of tension. I don't think any other Halo did this very effectively as this one did. And the way when you get off those cameras, you just see the weapons on the ground and the blood splatters, their bodies gone, is a perfect use of there's a reason those weapons are there. It gives them a reason to be there. Halo Combat Evolved did one huge thing, and it kind of revolutionized environmental storytelling as a whole. Basically, making sure the player could always use the human weapons for the entire campaign, but make sure there's a reason they can. Now, moving on to Halo 2, which is so far my favorite one in the series, except Legendary. I don't like playing on Legendary. One of the things, it used environmental storytelling, quite similarly to the first one, except in this case, we got to play as the Arbiter for a couple missions, so they were able to toss in different environmental storytelling cues than they would in the original. I will say one thing that was really strange to me was that in Halo 2, the player doesn't find very many crashed Pelicans, but they do find Pelican drop pods And I don't know if this is a bad or better use, but I personally preferred the Crash Pelicans because you could correlate that with ammo. With the drop pods, you kind of have to know where they're gonna be. Halo 2 got one detail down that is kind of neat when you look back at it. Halo 2 had the brutes, which they were very brute-like, to the Marines. You find brutes using the human shotgun, which is super interesting because in a way it is a very brute-like weapon. But also another detail is in the same mission you do run across this room full of Marine helmets, and it's an armor room full of rocket launchers, shotguns, battle rifles. This was a really small detail, maybe not super small, but it was kind of like interesting to actually see that in looking at it from this perspective. The environmental storytelling in Halo 3 sticks somewhat and mostly to the same way as the other two went. Halo 3 immediately starts with environmental storytelling with the first mission being set in the jungle, and you'll find dead Marine bodies because, well, the brutes are using them as more like playthings and just throwing them around for sport. The one level I did want to talk about that really intrigued me was Cortana. You can get your breath in. I know it's a terrifying mission. The mission Cortana has a bunch of really interestingly placed environmental details. For example, you'll find a couple ODST bodies throughout the ship, which I never figured out why they're there. But it's super neat, and one of them even has a flamethrower, as if they were prepped to come here. You'll even find a Crash Pelican with a dead Marine body near it. This also acts like the escape vehicle for Master Chief and Arbiter, so they're actually using environmental storytelling to give a reason why there's a Pelican there. The reason that this description is a bit lower for this game is because, well, we kind of already talked about the same game twice and about 3 times now. All these games utilize the same amount of environmental storytelling. It's when we get to Halo 4 and Halo 5 we'll see a difference in that environmental storytelling. Halo Reach is the prequel to Halo Combat Evolved, and is such a beautiful game on how it uses environmental storytelling. Minor points of environmental storytelling are simple like bullets in the wall or even just blood. These two simple little trails or environmental storytelling cases make such a huge difference in generating environment. Halo Reach takes place, well, on Reach, which is being basically glassed by the Covenant, and you get to see the loss of it, which in the case is going to affect the environmental storytelling a lot more. I think personally Halo's best mission is, well, Lone Wolf to show the environmental storytelling. As you walk around with your limited ammo, limited abilities, and limited grenades, limited health, everything. You see dead Marine bodies and dead Spartan bodies, which make you realize this is it. This is my last fighting area. And it shows that all these guys were trying to hold off this position and sadly died. I'm gonna quickly spout on something. I think games that use environmental storytelling to show a slow descent into madness or tragedy are really great, and Halo Reach was one of the games to have that. And I think that's what made us so connected to our character, was to see him fighting till the end with all these dead Spartans and dead Marines to attempt to hold his ground. Halo ODST is one of the big reasons I'm actually making this video, is because it's a game built in mind with environmental storytelling as a level component. For those of you that are confused, this mission takes place during Halo 2, specifically when that ship, the Covenant ship, warps out in the planet side. You see it causes destruction in the city, and this takes place right after that, kind of. You wake up at night, and, well, your pod pops open and you hop out. Looking around, you can see cars already crashed, graffiti saying this is like Reach. You are seeing the results of what happened that you missed out on. And I do want to emphasize, there's a lot of interestingly placed dead bodies for this game. One of my favorites is when you are starting to go up to Dare's helmet, you turn right and you see this hallway of lockers, and at the very end you find a dead police with a shotgun. This is a very simple use, but it shows that he was most likely gunned down there and he was trying to hold off that hallway. Environmental storytelling can be used in so many ways, like for resources, story, suggestions, or like correlations. By putting this blood around the city, usually that leads the player to goodies or enemies or objective. You even find recordings of the doctor's daughter the one that made the superintendent that's being affected by Virgil, and Virgil is showing you this for a later decision that happened in the game. Well, yes, you could say this is more of a case of telling. It's a very interesting side story to combine with this atmosphere. As I say again, Halo ODST was made with the idea of environmental storytelling being just a normal in that game. Whether that be through just small pieces of graffiti, turned over tables, dead bodies, it does it excellently. Unfortunately, this would be the last Halo where we had environmental storytelling. These next games do not use it very much or utilize it very well. Halo 4, I actually love. It's a really fun game to play, but when I was doing this video, it kind of made me realize it only has really one level of environmental storytelling, which is the one that takes place when you're meeting up the Infinity through the jungle. You'll find marine dead bodies. And unfortunately, this is the only level that kind of shows environmental storytelling. I kind of wish there was some way in the later levels where you're super limited on certain weapons. I kind of wish on those later levels they put dead bodies, and I know they had an armory, but the armory was kind of lazy work. It'd be cool to somehow have human bodies or even something else close to that. Well, Halo 4 did not do environmental storytelling very much or very often. It did use a lot of audio logs and terminals, which you could see as better or worse. I think it's good to have a good mixture of the two. Now, a lot of people give Halo 5 crap, but for the most part, I agree with them. I personally actually kind of like the gameplay, and Sword of St. Helios missions are great. This game actually has some really good instances of environmental storytelling, if it wasn't so overrun with audio logs. The audio logs aren't necessarily bad, but I think they're used a bit too commonly. For example, you find this whole mountain of dead Sword of St. Helios, and at the very top you actually see one with an energy sword still through it. And there's an audio log next to it, and it just basically explains that we're gonna go patrol in this area. What this game did, though, is it had a lot more than Halo 4.
Shut it down.
And I will admit, some of the audio logs are pretty amusing, and some of them actually bring up really interesting points to more questions that I would have thought of without that. Now, for Halo Infinite, from this one scene, I think it's going to be great. I genuinely think the environmental storytelling in this game is going to be amazing. Halo is going to use environmental storytelling in a whole new light. Emotional environmental storytelling. Basically giving the character the energy to kill the enemy or to deal with the conflict. By seeing this Spartan armor ripped off, it's breaking to the player, but it forms this conflict within the player that they must defeat the boss of the game before they can do any more of this. And if we want to get a little bit more deep about what happened to the Spartan, you have to imagine, by ripping off all that armor, I'm betting you during that process the brutes would be using so much strength that it would break bones and cause bleeding, internal and maybe even external. But the scary part is knowing that the Spartan bodies are really good at surviving in most cases, except water. Do not get them near water. They do not like water. They will die if they get hit by water. But back to the point is, this Spartan probably survived this entire process, and these brutes probably tossed him in the ring like we did in Halo 3 and had him fight brutes until he died. It's a really interesting interpretation of it, and that's the thought that went through my head immediately seeing that. What happened to the Spartan? Now, maybe I'm overanalyzing it, but what Halo Infinite's going to do is give people that emotional energy to do the objective. No other Halo's done this. Maybe if you want to try to count Halo ODST, or maybe Halo Reach. But those two games don't use it as well as Halo Infinite is going to be. And yes, I do know that Halo Infinite has audio logs. However, I think they're going to use them perfectly in sync with each other. It will be a beautiful combination of showing and telling. Halo Infinite is fully out now, and there's probably going to be so much small little details of environmental storytelling that's just hidden. But if we can all slowly work together and crack it, we'll find it all. What Halo had your favorite uses of environmental storytelling? In fact, do you remember a very specific moment of environmental storytelling that just stuck with you in your head?